You know, Ariel, it's a lovely little degree you earned. Really. But if you're not going to use it for anything important, then what was the point? We didn't pay for 4 years of university just for you to file obituaries at a community paper. My mother, Eleanor, delivered the hook with the casual, surgical precision of a woman who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of emotional control. We were sitting at the annual Thanksgiving table, the setting a familiar tableau of crystal, damask linen, and the collective, suffocating weight of the Hayes family's judgment. My name is Ariel Hayes. I am 28 years old, and my crime was ambition directed outside their narrow, visible world of corporate finance and law. For 7 years, they had deemed my career, journalism, a fluffy hobby that was, at best, cute, and at worst, an embarrassment. The context and character intro was rooted in their material success. My father, Arthur, 60, was the senior partner at a prestigious mergers and acquisitions firm. My older sister, Veronica, 32, was the family golden child, a flawless, glamorous corporate lawyer who specialized in public liability. Their lives were defined by tangible importance: high salaries, high visibility titles, and high net worth friends. I, the quiet observer, was the anomaly, the one who cared about truth, narrative, and impact over profit. The background conflict had festered since the day I chose to minor in political science instead of finance. They believed that significance was measured in dollar signs and influence peddling. I believed it was measured in the reach of one's voice. Every family gathering became an interrogation. "Still chasing ambulances, dear?" Veronica asked now, her voice smooth as polished stone, her diamond engagement ring flashing under the chandelier. "Dad was just saying you should come work for his PR team. We could use someone who understands how to handle local fluff." My father, Arthur, chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Veronica's right. You could make real money, Ariel, instead of this dead-end pursuit. You're 28. When are you going to be anyone important?" The humiliation scene was in full swing, conducted with the effortless cruelty only family can master. I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, the decade-old sting of their absolute dismissal. "My goal isn't to be important to the firm, Dad," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "It's to be important to the truth, and my writing is reaching a wider audience than you realize." "Oh, the blog posts." My mother sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. 100 people read them, dear. Veronica's last successful case was worth $500 million to the firm. That is importance. You're disposable. Arthur leaned forward, dropping his pretense of casual conversation. "Look, I'm serious, Ariel. I have a partner who sits on the board of Global News Network, GNN. I could make a call, get you a research position, maybe even a production assistant role. Something stable, something that actually pays well. Stop wasting your prime years." The offer wasn't kindness. It was a bribe wrapped in condescension. He wanted me close enough to control, far enough away from the spotlight to remain safely unimportant. "I appreciate the offer, Dad," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I'll get to GNN on my own terms. I don't need a corporate favor." Veronica laughed, a high, sharp sound. "You, on GNN? You'd be lucky to manage the coffee run, Ariel. You don't have the gravitas. You don't have the connections. You have a dusty laptop and a history of low expectations." I pushed back from the table, my appetite completely gone. "If you'll excuse me, I think I've had enough. Happy Thanksgiving." "Ungrateful," my mother whispered sharply as I walked away. Just like always, she thinks she's too good for us. I left the opulent dining room, the sound of their self-satisfied chatter fading behind me. That moment, that final, brutal judgment, never be anyone important, became the steel core of my ambition. I looked at the vast, intimidating city skyline through the window of their penthouse apartment. I wouldn't just reach GNN, I would reach the highest, most visible platform I could find. And when I did, they would be forced to look up. The next 5 years were a relentless, agonizing climb. I worked 6 days a week, often clocking 18-hour shifts. I started by stringing together freelance articles, taking the lowest-paying assignments, local politics, human interest stories, anything that built clips and experience. I slept on a perpetually lumpy futon in a noisy, small apartment and survived on instant noodles and pure, distilled spite. I moved from a local digital news site to a regional paper, then finally landed a low-level associate producer role at the Capital Exchange, a small, but respected political commentary channel based in DC. The job was grueling, demanding, and paid barely enough to cover my DC rent. But it put me in the room with real power brokers. I kept my family on a need-to-know basis, which was, essentially, zero. When my mother asked, I would vaguely say I was working in broadcast media and dismiss their follow-up questions. Their narrative of my failure was too deeply ingrained for them to question it. They assumed I was fetching coffee and managing email. My big break came not from a prestigious investigation, but from a technological anomaly. I developed an algorithm. My background was actually in data science, a secret I kept even from my editors, that could predict the trajectory of legislative bills based on sponsor history, committee composition, and media saturation. My system was 95% accurate. I used this algorithm to predict the surprise collapse of a major infrastructure bill 24 hours before it happened. My editor, stunned, put me on air to explain the data. My performance was quiet, knowledgeable, and utterly composed. I wasn't glamorous like Veronica. I was credible. The segment went viral. I had found my voice, not through screaming, but through irrefutable data. Within 18 months, I was promoted to data and political correspondent. I was hosting my own deep dive segment, The Unfiltered Line, focused on using data to debunk political spin. My face was now recognizable in political circles. My family, however, remained willfully blind. Veronica sent me a text after seeing a grainy screenshot of me on a small DC news blog. Cute set, sis. You finally get to sit at the desk? Remember to hydrate. You look tired. Dad says don't forget your health insurance paperwork for his accountant. They still believed I was a struggling minor league blogger, but the world was changing fast, and my visibility was growing exponentially. 2 years after my first on-air break, I was headhunted by the very network my father had offered to bribe to get me a PA job, Global News Network, GNN. They wanted me to anchor a brand new primetime news analysis show based entirely on my data-driven model. The title, Reality Check. The contract was astronomical, complete with a 6-figure salary, a state-of-the-art studio in New York, and national exposure every night at 8 p.m. EST. I was, at 33, about to become one of the most visible, respected faces in modern American journalism. I accepted the contract immediately. I moved to New York, adopting a new level of professional polish, but keeping the core of my identity, the quiet, data-obsessed outsider, intact. I purchased a beautiful, light-filled condo, with cash from my signing bonus. I had achieved the tangible importance they valued, entirely on my own terms. The launch of Reality Check was explosive. I was immediately recognized as a refreshing, necessary voice, cutting through hyperbole with fact-based, rigorous analysis. I had achieved the importance they had denied me. Not corporate importance, but cultural significance. I knew my family was watching now. They had to be. My face was on billboards, taxis, and the front page of every industry magazine. But the silence from them was deafening. They chose denial over acknowledgement. They preferred the narrative of their own importance to the reality of my triumph. The current event trigger that would force the ultimate confrontation wasn't my success. It was their failure. The unraveling of the Hayes dynasty began quietly, then escalated into a national scandal. Arthur Hayes' M&A firm, Arthur Hayes & Partners, AHP, had been involved in the highly controversial acquisition of a major energy company. The deal, celebrated locally as a triumph of corporate finance, was quickly flagged by federal investigators for potential violations of corporate law and ethics related to insider trading and hidden offshore accounts. The scandal broke exactly 1 week before the midterm elections. The timing, the size of the company, and the political sensitivity of the energy sector made it instant, massive, headline news. My network, GNN, jumped on the story immediately. It dominated our 24-hour cycle. The lead segment for my show, Reality Check, was dedicated to analyzing the complex web of shell companies and political donations linked to the AHP deal. I maintained professional distance, simply reporting the facts and running my data models. No one at GNN knew the Hayes and the News were my family. I kept the secret zealously. The situation worsened for the Hayes family. The pressure from the federal investigation mounted. The firm's stock plummeted. Arthur and Veronica, once lauded as corporate titans, were now media villains, their pictures plastered across every news site with the word scandal. A crisis of this magnitude demanded a public response. A controlled, contrite statement designed to manage the narrative and save what little reputation they had left. On a Tuesday afternoon, my producer Marcus, no relation to my brother, burst into my studio office. "Ariel, we just got confirmation. The Hayes family is granting their first and only live interview to GNN. It's going to be a primetime exclusive." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Who is conducting the interview?" I asked, my voice betraying nothing. The head of network news wanted to give it to the lead political anchor, but I fought for reality check. Marcus grinned triumphantly. "They need a rigorous, data-focused platform to counter the accusations, and you are the most credible voice we have. You'll be interviewing Arthur Hayes, Veronica Hayes, and Eleanor Hayes, the entire inner circle. Live, 8 p.m. EST tomorrow night." I leaned back in my chair, the world tilting violently into place. The final perfect confrontation, the precise moment of climax and revelation, was here. They had deemed me unimportant. Now, their survival, their public narrative, and their entire reputation rested in my hands. I was the gatekeeper to their redemption. "Book the studio," I said, my voice steady. "And Marcus? Clear my schedule. I need to prepare my questions. This is going to be the most important interview of the year." The next 24 hours were a blur of meticulous preparation. I didn't just review the federal documents and the AHP's financial history. I reviewed the history of my own humiliation. I spent hours in my condo, poring over old family albums and mental notes of every cruel dismissal. Arthur's condescending offer of a PA job, Veronica's sneering about my lack of gravitas, and Eleanor's final venomous accusation. "Ungrateful. She thinks she's too good for us." I prepared 3 sets of questions. The first was the expected, hard-hitting professional line: shell corporations, insider trading allegations, and the firm's ethical obligations. The second set was the personal line, designed to gently peel back the corporate veneer and expose the human cost of the scandal. The third set was strictly for my use, the psychological questions, the ones rooted in the 10 years of denial, that would ensure they understood, live on national television, exactly who was asking the questions. The evening of the interview arrived. I walked into the GNN headquarters in New York, calm, focused, and utterly transformed. I wore a sharp, custom-tailored suit that whispered authority. My makeup and hair were professionally styled, giving me the gravitas Veronica had once said I lacked. I entered the main green room 45 minutes before airtime. My family was already there. Arthur looked pale and defeated, his suit rumpled. Eleanor was frantic, adjusting his tie and fussing with his appearance. Veronica, though trying to project confidence, looked brittle, her perfect armor cracking under the stress. They looked up as I entered, and the recognition hit them, slowly, brutally, like a physical blow. Eleanor spoke first, her eyes wide with shocked disbelief. "Ariel, what are you doing here? Did you get a job fetching water for the anchor?" "No, Mother," I said, my voice low and steady. "I'm the anchor. I'm conducting your interview." Arthur's face drained of all color. He looked from the nameplate on my dressing room door, Ariel Hayes, anchor, to my composed, commanding presence. You're the unfiltered line girl? The GNN anchor?" "I am," I confirmed, walking toward them. "And this isn't the unfiltered line, Dad. Tonight, you're on reality check." Veronica recovered first, resorting to her oldest weapon, denial mixed with furious condescension. "This is a setup! You manipulated GNN! You can't interview us. It's a conflict of interest. You're incompetent." "On the contrary, Veronica," I said, leaning in, ensuring the full power of my preparation was felt. "I have the deepest possible knowledge of the subjects involved. My integrity is what got me this chair, not Daddy's bribe. You have 3 minutes before we go live. You can choose to cooperate and try to salvage your reputation, or you can storm out and confirm every allegation the federal investigators have made. The choice is entirely yours." Arthur grabbed Veronica's arm, his voice a panicked hiss. "Stop, Veronica! We can't walk out!" "We can't." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Ariel, please. We need you. We need GNN's platform. Be fair." "Fairness," I stated, looking at my family, the people who had denied my worth for a decade. "Fairness is a luxury you never afforded me. Tonight, you will receive only the truth." I left the green room and walked to the main studio. I settled into the anchor's chair, the lights flooding the set, the earpiece clicking into place. My guests were already seated across from me, their faces illuminated by the merciless studio lights. The camera operators were ready. 10 seconds to air. The director's voice buzzed in my ear. 5, 4, 3. I looked across the glass desk at my family. They looked trapped, exposed, and absolutely terrified. They were no longer the powerful corporate titans. They were desperate subjects awaiting judgment. The red tally light clicked on. "Good evening, and welcome to Reality Check," I began, my voice clear, measured, and nationally broadcast. Tonight, the corporate scandal engulfing AHP and its senior partners reaches a new level of scrutiny. We have with us exclusively the family at the center of the storm. Arthur Hayes, founding partner, his wife Eleanor Hayes, and daughter Veronica Hayes, AHP legal counsel. Thank you all for joining us. I started with the professional questions, using the data-driven rigor GNN viewers expected. Mr. Hayes, my data shows a clear pattern of asset transfer leading up to the acquisition announcement, specifically 40 million moved to an offshore trust. Can you definitively state that those transfers were unrelated to the deal and did not constitute insider trading? Arthur stumbled, attempting the usual corporate deflection. Ariel, those were legacy transfers. Pre-existing trust agreements. Pre-existing, Mr. Hayes? I interrupted, cutting through his spin with the precision of a trained litigator. My firm's model predicts, with 98% certainty, that the movement of those specific assets was triggered by the final acquisition date. Why would your firm's own chief legal counsel, sitting here, not flag that as a major regulatory risk? I turned to Veronica. The camera focused on her face, illuminating the fear in her eyes. The confidence that had defined her corporate persona was gone. Ms. Hayes, you signed off on the due diligence. Are you telling the American public that you advised your father that moving $40 million offshore just before a major deal was ethically sound? Veronica stammered, unable to speak, the camera holding tight on her face. Her silence spoke volumes, confirming her professional negligence for millions of viewers. I pivoted to Eleanor, knowing this was where the narrative control would snap. Mrs. Hayes, while your husband and daughter are fighting legal battles, your foundation is facing questions about its funding sources. Is it true that the foundation's primary assets are directly linked to the controversial offshore accounts? Eleanor, unprepared for a question outside the corporate structure, looked horrified. This is inappropriate. I handle the charity. My husband handles the money. I don't know the sources. You are being cruel, Ariel. This is personal. The emotional bomb was delivered. I paused, letting her uncontrolled outburst hang in the air. Then I leaned forward, lowering my voice, making the next question personal, intimate, and entirely devastating. It is personal, Mrs. Hayes. 10 years ago, my father offered to buy me a junior position at this network because he believed I'd never be anyone important. He believed my worth was zero. Tonight, I am the anchor of this network, and your reputation, your husband's freedom, and your daughter's career all hinge on whether I choose to treat you with the fairness you denied me for a decade. Do you finally understand the importance of the woman you dismissed? The silence from the Hayes family was absolute. Arthur stared at the desk, defeated. Veronica was crying silent tears. Eleanor's eyes were wide with a comprehension that was far more painful than any corporate fine. They finally saw my power, and it was devastatingly real. I didn't wait for an answer. We'll take a short break. When we return, we will discuss the legal fallout with the former chief legal counsel of the SEC. The red light on the camera snapped off. The moment the commercial started, Arthur lunged toward the desk.
Ariel, you set us up.
You are trying to destroy us. You destroyed yourselves, Dad, I replied, standing to stretch my legs. I just chose the camera angle. You are not a victim. You are a subject of a federal investigation, and I am a professional journalist. The only thing I set up was this entire network. Veronica, her voice raw, spoke through her tears. You hate us! You did this out of spite. I don't hate you, Veronica, I said truthfully. I simply achieved the gravitas you said I lacked. Your mistake was confusing importance with integrity. Now sit down. We have 2 minutes before we go back live. Try to answer the questions honestly this time, or your silence will be the final verdict. I walked off set to grab water, leaving them trapped under the weight of the cameras, the lights, and their own crumbling reality. The second half of the interview was even more brutal, focused entirely on the details that would inevitably lead to criminal indictments. When the interview concluded, Arthur, Veronica, and Eleanor left the studio without a word. Their public apology attempt had failed. utterly and completely, dismantled by the one person they never feared. The consequence and moral closure played out over the next 5 years, the professional collapse. Within 6 months, Arthur Hayes faced indictment. The evidence I helped expose on Reality Check provided crucial context for the prosecution. Veronica was stripped of her license to practice law, her career ending not with a bang, but with the quiet shame of professional disbarment. AHP was dissolved, its assets liquidated. The financial fallout. My family lost everything. Their sprawling estate, the corporate apartments, the luxury cars, all seized or sold off to cover legal costs and restitution. Arthur was eventually convicted on multiple counts of fraud and served a minimum sentence, his life of corporate prestige ending in a federal prison cell. The media narrative. I became the defining narrative of the scandal. GNN featured me heavily, not just for the interview itself, but for the story of the quiet, data-driven anchor who exposed her own family's corruption. My importance was no longer debatable. It was historic. I was named one of the most influential people in media. The final encounter. 5 years after the interview, I was covering a major political event in my old D.C. neighborhood. I was walking out of the local news bureau when I saw a familiar, defeated figure washing windows at a small independent coffee shop across the street. It was Liam, the golden heir. He saw me, the nationally recognized anchor, surrounded by security and producers. He flinched, turning away, ashamed. I walked across the street, dismissing my team with a wave. "Liam," I said quietly. He turned slowly, his face etched with failure. His hands were red and chapped from the cleaning chemicals. "Ariel, you don't have to talk to me. I know who you are." "I know who you are too, Liam," I said. "You're earning an honest wage, something you never had to do before." "They're all gone, Ariel," he whispered. "Dad's out, but he's broken. Mom and Veronica are living in a tiny apartment outside of town. They blame you, of course." "They blame the consequences of their own choices," I corrected. I just held the camera. "I was wrong about you," Liam admitted, looking down at the bucket. "We all were. You were the only one who was ever actually important. Not because of GNN, but because you had the integrity to stand outside the machine." I looked at my brother, the man who had always been held up as the example of real importance. He was finally, quietly, learning what real life was. "You're right about one thing, Liam," I said. "I never found the importance you valued. I found something better, the truth. And my truth became a national story. I didn't offer him money or a job. I gave him a respectful nod and walked away. My importance wasn't in their redemption. It was in my unwavering independence. I had become the most important person in the room, and I had done it by following the path they scorned. The story was over, and the final verdict, delivered by the world, not by me, was irreversible.